I'm Renee Richard, host of Roots of Faith, and today we're down in Assumption Parish to visit St. Joseph the Worker. It is here in Assumption Parish in Pierreport being the largest community in Assumption. But if we look at the historical nature of this area, when our settlers came in the 1700s, both the Acadians and the Canary Islanders, they were about 14 miles east of here along Bayou Lafourche. And as they multiplied and as land became scarcer, people migrated further back into the swamps. This area has historically been one in a floodplain. They have dealt with flooding throughout their entire history, which makes for a very interesting history. We're located right next to the levee of the Atchafalaya Spillway. Actually, this area is considered part of the spillway just outside the levee protection, which increases the risk of flooding here. So join us as we explore how water has impacted this wonderful parish of St. Joseph the Worker. I have as my guest today Father Al Davidson here at St. Joseph the Worker, and welcome to the show, Father Al.
Thank you very much for having me. We're glad to be here.
That's it. So tell us a little bit about yourself and how long you've been actually here in Pierreport.
We've begun our 7th year here, so this was my second assignment. We came not knowing what to expect. I had never been to the community other than the restaurant bar across the street in the Rainbow Inn in years past. So I came not knowing what to expect, and actually when I got here the church was completely gutted. They were beginning a renovation, and so thankfully having some history in construction, I think that may have been why the bishop sent me here. So it went on for 11 months. So we
completed what you
walked
into.
Yes, we got more than I expected. We were having Mass in the hall for 11 months while the construction was going on.
Goodness.
So, but it turned out I'd never seen the former interior of the church.
Oh, it's beautiful.
And so, well, I'm told it's completely different in that it's light in color, it's bright, things are different.
That's it. Now, the building itself was here, this church. There have been many churches over the years, and we'll talk a little bit about that because of some of the floods and different things that this area is prone to. But this particular church was built right after Vatican II in the 1960s, correct?
64.
And it was designed by the pastor itself with something special in mind, right?
Right. With the idea that most people, even at that time, were still coming in boats. The bridge that you cross to get from, I live on an island, and cross over to a second island to get to a third island. So in the 60s, people were still coming in boats. The bulkhead was built with the idea of people being able to
tie up their boats.
tie up, as was the island for Our Lady. So, in fact, in October when the bishop was here for Mass on the island, he was surrounded by boats and houseboats, so it was very unique for him. So the idea had with an inverted roof that looks like a boat. It was something they felt a part of. And I think the pastor at the time understood that.
Right.
That as a community that is basically a swamp, the Mississippi is only about 10 miles one way, and right now the water level's at about 30 feet. And the spillway is about 6 feet, and we're sitting here 3 feet.
Yes.
So we're in a bowl. And so the idea of having a boat for God's house just made them feel right at home.
And that is so characteristic because this area was founded as swampers and as fishermen historically since the 1800s. And I know as a child in the 60s, traveling here to get to Morgan City, there was one way in, Highway 70, and then you hit a gravel road along the spillway
The levee.
that took you to Morgan City, and now it's paved. I mean, Highway 70 will take you from the interstate, basically at Sorrento, all the way to Morgan City. And so as a result, this area has boomed and flourished over the years.
yes.
But in the 60s, I mean, my family owns land on Lake Barrett. We've done a show on the Chapel Boat and the waterways here. So, yes, that is, and even now when you cross that bridge, if you look to your right or your left, you're going to see houseboats.
Yes.
There's no doubt about it. So I didn't realize, though, that the bulkhead was intended for that. And I would imagine they still come to Mass in boats in the summer? Some?
Well, we have Mass on the island in May and October. And so both of those months, they intentionally bring the boats because part of the Mass is the
part of
blessing
that.
of the boats
Right.
after Mass.
Yeah, because
So-
most of the camps, I think, in this area, too, are accessible by car.
Oh, yes, yes.
Because we go by
Now-
boat. We go to church by boat, and we dock at a bulkhead down along at Stevensville when we're at a camp, but we have to get to our camp by boat. So it's a little bit different, but that is our means of transportation. I just didn't know if it was that way here, because that is the nature of this wonderful place.
Yes, it is the culture, it is built in, and it goes back. I mean, the history of Mary's Star to the Sea in the mid-30s, that idea of having a church that was portable and that could be from a half dozen different spots, from Lake Barrett all the way to Bayou Pigeon, Bayou Sorrel,
Yeah.
all of these people whose grandparents made their first communion on that boat, and speak of just that heritage and that culture that is so Catholic.
We were talking about the chapel boat, and it was our best show, I think, in the early series, but it's important to kind of know when this all took place, and that's one of the key things with St. Joseph the Worker that people still identify with, and that is really one of the jewels of this parish that no other parish can boast. And that was the fact that in the 1930s, Father Jules Toops was the pastor here, and a wealthy benefactor that, like up in New York State, offered to provide him. They did missionary work, and this was such a swampy area. We're looking at right after the flood of 27, within 10 years, they're putting up what is now the
levees.
spillway. Was not even put in. It took a while for them to get that up. So these waterways were wide open. This is an isolated community, and as you were saying, he had no way, other than by boat, of reaching the people that lived in all these waterways, which in today's world are so far few than then. So the chapel boat was in the 1930s, and it literally covered the territory along Iberville, the western border of Iberville, up through Bayou Sorrel, Bayou Pigeon, Bayou Goodell, Bell River, and then down a 4-mile bayou, and sometimes it would loop around and come up Lake Barrett towards the Immaculate Conception Chapel. So, and these were all various missions that the boat would cover during the week when the priest would stay here on the weekend, and Father Jules would set out. And we have some of the detailed records at the archives of how amazing it was. But to this day, we get phone calls from people, as you were saying, and that's why I wanted to touch base. The 1930s was not that far away. My parents were born in 35, and people call us looking for pictures of First Communions that took place on it and various things like that. So although it's approaching the 80-year mark, it has made the 80-year mark, it's still such a part of this parish.
Well, and if the high water didn't give us some remembrance of how before the levees were there,
Right.
before the spillway, I mean, the high water, right? I mean, a
it's
lot
a
of
way
these
of life,
places, the only access was through the boat.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, the Star of the Sea actually wasn't a boat, it was a barge, and that was towed from
Mm-hmm. Right.
location to location, and so.
By the Francis Xavier towboat.
Yep. And so, again, I mean, springtime, without the Star of the Sea, they would not have seen a priest for months.
On end.
So, again, thankfully, now with the spillways and roadways, we have access to the people, and, the church is still the basis for the community. There are about 4,200
That
people
was my next
that
question.
live in the area. And again, we're The community, the church parish, is 5 islands, and half of the area is actually water. And so it's an 18-mile drive to Bayou Pigeon. It's only 8 miles by boat.
By boat.
So again, there is such a connection between the two communities, even though one is in Iberville Parish and we are in Assumption Parish. Napoleonville is 10 miles by water, 20 miles by road.
Exactly.
So again, we are surrounded, and thankfully, when it rains, we have a lot of places for water to go because we're only 3 feet above sea level. So it's a gift to be a part of something, a heritage and a culture that is Catholic, French. I think more than 60% of my community still speaks French. I don't speak the words they're trying to teach me. They are welcoming, and yet they still only treat others as outsiders when they come bringing chaos. In other words, as long as you come in and you are welcoming, generous, you're loved and welcomed, but don't bring chaos because they're not accustomed to it.
That's it. It's a very laid-back area
Simple.
here. So we're talking about the people in this church. Tell us a little bit more about the campus itself.
Well, I was blessed in that Father Clarence Wagaspak was here for 15 years prior to my coming, and halfway through his tenure, he decided to build a new rectory, a new office, and a new education building. So in the mid, I guess 2004 or 5, they began with a capital campaign to raise the funds, and they built the new office. The rectory, I think, was first, and he moved in 2008. In 2009, the office and the education building were completed. And so he wanted to do the renovation for the church before he left. So in 2012, they began, and the construction actually started for the church in the beginning of 2013. And so I came in July of 2013 to a completely gutted church. I'd never seen it beforehand other than in pictures. And so, again, everything he had planned was unique to this parish and made it special, and the people were involved. They have been very generous. We still owed $500,000 on the previous buildings, and more than $750,000 for this. And in the 6 years since we've settled the note, we're down to only a $500,000 debt.
All right, so it's getting there.
It's getting
bit.
It's getting there.
Talking about this church and the renovation, some of the things that are here present are from the old church previous.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
Some of the statues for sure.
Yes. The pastor that designed the church gave away the Mary and Joseph statues that were in the church before this one, before the 60s, to build a new modern church with statues that were not painted, that were left just bare and raw, as was the crucifix. And so the people decided they wanted a little color, so we've had the statues painted. We have some temporary Stations of the Cross. We, in closing Pigeon Bayou Sorrel, we found some of the original stations that were in the church before this one.
Oh, wow.
That we're actually having renovated and completely refurbished. And so when they are done, we'll put them back, which, again, as Mary and Joseph made some of the parishioners cry, so will the original Stations of the Cross. So
that's great.
We're blessed. The church holds about 500. We have 3 masses on the weekend. During this summer, campers, all the souls who come and partake of God's country and the beauty of the waterways. So I can have as many as 200 to 300 campers on a given weekend.
Wow.
So, of course, our unidentified income goes up. They make themselves appreciated in their generosity. So.
Talking about the campus and the facility here, this church is built on the site of previous churches, and the cemetery is directly behind us along the water's edge. And this is some of the highest ground. These people in the 1800s knew what they were doing to find the highest ground for where they built their churches. And so the cemetery is just directly behind us, and it dates back, I think, to the 1800s.
So the late 1800s.
And it is the original.
The original chapel that was built didn't last long. It was
Right.
flooded and devastated by storms. So, but the cemetery has survived, and so it begins in the 1800s and is
Thriving
100
and
feet
growing.
long, but we're down to less than 50 places to actually spots that are available, and so we built, or they had built 4 sections of mausoleums prior to my coming, which have all sold, and so there's really very little available. So the chapel that was in Bell River, which again was destroyed, there's a cemetery there, Sacred Heart Cemetery, and so if you want a mausoleum, you purchase there, and if you want to be in Pierrepont, you can have one of the 50 spots that are available. We have purchased an additional 2 acres adjacent to the property to build mausoleums, which we're in the process of discussing to see if we have enough families who, to build a mausoleum, you need to build a mausoleum with 300, you need to sell 150, and right now we're questioning whether we can do that. But
Yeah. But you talked a little bit just now when you said about the flooding that has, in the earlier chapel that used to be here. There have been floods in the 1880s. I know there were floods, and of course in recent times, as recent as this past spring, when it was coming up your parking lot. Besides that, that one of the churches was destroyed by a hurricane in 1908, the same hurricane that destroyed the steeples at St. Elizabeth, not far from here, and that demolished it. And of course, because of some of the destruction that's happened, the tornado that came through in 1940 that spared 300 children that were right across the street in the elementary school. There is a strong devotion here to the Blessed Mother. And that's where I'm going with this, is that because of the different natural disasters that have occurred here, they feel the Blessed Mother has spared them in these, and that really is how that island that sits out in Pierrepont Bay came about, is it not?
my front yard.
Your front
And
yard, that's right.
Having such a devotion to Mary, to come here and see, when I came back to church, I joined a rosary group that was To Jesus Through Mary. And the altar on the island says, To Jesus through Mary. I knew I was home. And so, yes, during one of the storms, a wooden statue of Mary ended up flying across the bay onto the island and standing straight up after the storm. So what was just a little spot of land, they have developed, and it has
Designated,
evolved into the island of the Blessed Virgin Mary, which is my front yard. And with the high water, the house itself became another island. Middle of May, I actually had to stop in my driveway. The water was 18 inches across the road, and the lilies were blowing across the road. So, and we're in the process of putting in a gateway on the bridge to the island. So it's a very special place.
And it's celebrated here every May.
Every
There's the
May and
crowning,
October.
And then in October,
we
which are months for Mary, just to show the devotion here. And the Acadian people that settled this area brought with them a very strong devotion to the Blessed Mother. I don't think that's ever left, but it was made stronger due to these
Father
natural
Wagaspack
disasters.
and Father Dwayne Bro, who was here before, who got the Army Corps of Engineers to actually put up the original bulkhead to form the island, and then
And stabilize
Father
it.
Wagaspack came and
erosion
got
to
some
get
generous
around.
parishioners to build the bridge and to redo the gazebo, and they actually purchased a new statue. The wooden statue of Mary is buried on the island, and there's a cast iron Mary who won't be flying anywhere. She weighs over 300 pounds.
Oh, goodness.
She's a permanent structure on the island, and so.
And it's so nice when you come by boat, because we come by boat sometimes to see, her on the island. Really brings your faith forward too. It's a
And
constant
again, some
reminder.
generous parishioners. We have a rosary walk with very nice Italian sculptured bronze sculptures of all the mysteries, and a 10-foot crucifix with a bronze corpus of Jesus. So it's beautiful. It's a very spiritual and prayerful place to come.
We've been talking about the Blessed Mother, the devotion of people here. Tell us a little bit about the strength of the ministries, or some of the ministries that are exceptional here.
Most of the ministries start with the rosary, with this idea of prayer.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a group of individuals who every day, Sunday through Friday, pray the rosary on the island at 5 o'clock in the evening.
Oh, wow.
And Saturday, it's 9 a.m. in the morning
Mm-hmm.
because we have the vigil mass in the evening.
Right.
So and that devotion and prayer has evolved into, we have a Wednesday night prayer group that meets in the hall. We have a men's Monday night prayer group, the Kingsmen, who meet, and we began in the home, in the rectory for the first 3 years, but it outgrew the rectory, so now we meet in the meeting room in the hall.
That's awesome.
And it all begins with prayer, and it all begins with the rosary. This strength. We've begun a children's rosary group. During the months of May and October, we pray the rosary before every Mass on Sunday, and the children will lead the vigil Mass rosary. And it's just a joy to pass on this tradition of prayer and of ministering to others. We have a very strong bereavement group. The average age of our parishioners is 70, and so we average a funeral or more a week.
Okay.
And so the community is built on food and drink, and so to celebrate this gift of life, the families come together and provide for one another. So those who have stricken with cancer, we provide food
Okay.
and comfort to bring them assurance of as still being part of the community and still being loved and cared for. We have, obviously choir and readers and community that participate in the liturgy and still find a strong love for the Mass, for the sacraments, and their faith is built on the sacraments. It's so a part of who they are and where they've come from, and again, the idea of baptism and water and the Spirit. The community is alive with the Spirit.
Okay. Now, children. You talked about the children's
Rosary
participant
group.
thing. Are there a lot of children in this community?
Not as many as the public school across the street in the last 3 years has dropped from 800 to about 550.
Okay. But still a good size,
So,
considering,
I mean,
yeah.
our religious education, having had 12 years ago when they were taught in the public school, the largest in the diocese, we're now down to about 250.
Wow. Okay.
So not as many families that come. Though they have 1,600 registered, I claim only about 400 families because we have roughly 600 to 800 people that come to Mass on the weekend.
Okay.
It is what it is.
It is. Now, one thing you mentioned earlier that I don't want to forget here, too, is this is St. Joseph, it's St. Joseph the Worker. And as we see in other parishes, sometimes around St. Joseph's feast day, we see St. Joseph altars. That has not necessarily been a tradition here. That is more of an Italian tradition. So we see it in a lot of our Italian communities. This is more, your Cajun, your Spanish, love of food and drink. And a new tradition has started here.
Yes.
Am I correct?
Yes,
Revolving around St.
where
Joseph.
most of the St. Joseph altars are in March, when his feast day on March 19th. We determined that St. Joseph the Worker should be May 1st.
Okay.
And so one of the parishioners came and asked if she could start it, and I was, please, thank you. I've waited 6
Now,
years.
this is recent. This is this year.
Just this past May. And again, the water was high. We didn't know what to expect for a turnout. So after the vigil mass, everything was set up in the hall, and we had a procession to the hall to bless the altar and bless the food and to partake of the food. And the community was so generous in their donations that it didn't cost anything, and we provided food not only for the 250 that showed up to partake, but they brought food to the nursing home in Napoleonville and to St. Vincent de Paul's for Sunday. And I'm talking boiled crab,
I was about to say, it's a
boiled
different
shrimp.
take.
Oh, yeah. Yes,
So
yeah.
tell us a
Ours
little
was
bit about-
Cajun.
yes, it was a
Rather than
Cajun.
there were some Italian cookies, very few, but everything else was Cajun. Everything else was food. There were bottles of wine. A winery had given cases of wine. We had boiled crabs, boiled shrimp, boiled crawfish, crawfish etouffee. I mean, there was a little taste of everything that is Cajun. The people that ate could not believe the quality of the food and of all that they were able to see, because they used wooden models of the old putt-putt boats, of the pirogues, of crawfish nets, the history, and showed the different makes of crab traps. And so
Oh, wow.
people
So-
were
so-
able to see really a history of the community in the altar.
And for St. Joseph.
And of St.
Yeah.
Joseph, yes.
It's been wonderful learning about St. Joseph here in Pierpont, this parish. If there were any one thing that, or a few words to describe in general this congregation, this parish, can you think of something? What would it be?
Well, I think God knows what he's doing in sending the priest to a parish, because having 30 years of construction, I came here, St. Joseph the Worker, in a community that is blue collar. A lot of the men and women go and work in the plants and do construction work. And so we speak the same language, and there is this generosity and love of the community that makes them unique. I tell people, say, well, how is the community? I say, well, they're a generation behind Baton Rouge, right? In that my truck's not locked, the house is not
There's
locked.
nothing wrong with
No one
that.
would break into the rectory. No one would break into the house with the priest. So there is something special about this community.
Awesome.
That I don't want to leave.
Well, we're out of time, so I thank you so much for
Thank you for
interviewing,
coming.
talking to us about this wonderful parish, and join us again, folks, for another episode of Roots of Faith.